In my previous video, I painted my engine bay, so now it's time to reinstall my front suspension. Since my wheel wells are empty, I touched them up with a little bit of undercoating. If you aren't subscribed to my channel, please consider hitting that sub button. Once the undercoating is dry, go ahead and remove the masking. Since my crossmember was filthy, I sprayed it with degreaser and then pressure washed it. And funny enough, it was actually raining while I was doing this. Once the crossmember is dry, go ahead and reinstall it. I wasn't able to install the crossmember by myself, so my brother is holding up the crossmember in this shot. Install the 6 M14 bolts, then torque them to 130 pound-feet. I went ahead and replaced all these bolts with USA-made 10.9s because the stock bolts are nearly 30 years old and are probably a little bit brittle. The Holley LS Swap engine mounts are dropped in and bolted down. There are serrated flange nuts that secure these bolts. I can't fit a camera inside the K-member, so I can't really show you. The triangle crossmember supports are reinstalled and then torqued down. I had to use a thread chaser since some of the engine bay paint got into the threads. Once the threads are clear, the Wonder Bar is installed. My camber caster plates are a little bit dirty, so they need a little bit of TLC. I did a very quick disassembly and full wipe down. The monoball is cleaned up and then sprayed with graphite lubricant. It's important to keep these spherical bearings moving freely to avoid strut failures. The strut mounts are installed with new nuts and washers. My rebuilt redhead steering box is mounted up. Make sure to support the steering box as you install the bolts. The box itself probably won't stay put as you bolt it up. The zinc-coated grade 8 bolts are torqued down to 70 pound-feet. Go ahead and bolt up the pitman arm. It will be torqued down a little later on. A quick pull makes sure the pitman arm is positioned correctly. The new idler arm is bolted up. The bolts will be torqued later on when the center link height can be measured. The new center link is bolted up with some brand new castle nuts. The two new inner tie rods are bolted up. The center link has these little foam washers to block dirt and debris. The castle nuts are torqued to 35 pound-feet or a little bit more to align the cotter pin holes. Install the cotter pins. A few bends, cuts, and a few hits with a hammer, and the cotter pins are set. Apply some grease to the inner tie rods. And then my tie rod sleeves are screwed on. Since my spindles are a tad dirty, I decided to clean up any casting flash with a grinder. A quick media blast, a few shots of Pour 15 paint, and the spindles look brand new. And since I'm a crazy person, I decided to lock wire my caliper mounts. I drilled safety wire holes in some Allen head bolts. Once the bolts are torqued down, we can start the safety wiring. The 32,000s stainless wire is fed through the holes. A quick tug gets the wire nice and straight. Line up the safety wire pliers to the top bolt hole, and then use the safety wire pliers to twist the line. We are looking for about 10 twists per inch of wire. Feed one of the wires through the top bolt. Go ahead and straighten the wire, and then do a little bit more twisting. Cut off the excess and loop the end of the wire. My crossmember ears had to be bent out a decent amount to fit these new A-arms. The new Detroit Speed A-arm goes in with new zinc-coated hardware. I then installed brand new 10.9 lock nuts. The bolts are snugged down and then torqued to spec. My cleaned off weight jacks are thrown in. I put my wheel cribs underneath the A-arm to keep it from falling down. And then my freshly painted spindle goes on. A new castle nut is installed with an extra thick washer. The struts are up next. Install the strut top nut. My bump steer kit is installed with a brand new ARP flange nut. Go ahead and install the strut knuckle bolts. If you're still using the original strut knuckle bolts, now is a good time to replace them with new ones. Once the bolts are tight, torque them down to 150 pound-feet. Moving on to my billet hubs. I popped off the dust cap and removed the outer bearing. Flip the hub and remove the seal and inner bearing. The old bearing grease is wiped off. This redline grease turns black as it ages, but it's still good. All the bearings look to be in okay condition, so I'll be reusing them. But I will be installing these Joe's Racing billet dust covers. The stock caps always end up flying off. Using this billet cap drill guide, drill 2 holes in the hub. Once the holes are drilled, use the supplied tap and make some threads. Remove any metal shavings that might have fallen into the hub, and then wipe the hub completely clean with acetone. Now it's time to do some bearing packing. A firm press and the bearings are packed and ready with brand new grease. The inner bearing is installed, followed by the dust seal. A small piece of a 2x4 and a dead blow makes installing the seal rather easy. Install the smaller outer bearing. Clean off the spindle shaft and then coat it in a little bit of grease. Then the hub slides right in. Install the washer and castle nut. My El Cheapo dial indicator helps me set bearing lash. And since my hub is aluminum, the lash is set on the low side to about 0.02 of an inch. Once the lash is set, install a new cotter pin. I added more grease for good measure. The billet caps are installed and tightened down. Now we can torque down the ball joint castle nut. Some ball joint brands have slightly higher or lower torque specs, so keep that in mind. Once the torque spec is reached, a new stainless cotter pin is installed. My 13-inch rotor slides onto the hub. I had to sand off some rust on these rotors because they sat for a decent while. A quick wipe with the solvent gets the dust and grease off the surface. And now my Wilwood calipers get bolted up. The bolts are snugged down and then torqued to spec. The factory wheels are installed just for now. And with the tires back on the ground, the pitman arm nut can be torqued down. It's torqued to a massive 185 pound-feet. Next is installing the front sway bar. Lift the bar into place, then loosely install the bushing bolts. Jack up the car and remove the tires. Install the Detroit Speed end links. Tighten down the nut, then torque them to 40 pound-feet. Install the poly end link bushings and lock nut. And then repeat this on both sides. Reinstall the wheels and get the car on the ground. Once the weight is on the front end, go ahead and tighten the bushing bolts. Make sure that the sway bar is good and centered before you torque them down. Use a wrench and tighten down the end links. Keep tightening down the nut until the poly bushings are slightly compressed. The front suspension is looking real good. So I did have to modify my steering stops when using the Detroit Speed A-arms. For some reason, they didn't work out of the box, even with factory wheels, and weren't even remotely close with my race tires installed. I'm not sure what's going on there, but modifying steering stops is something I've done multiple times, so it's not a big deal for me, but just keep that in mind. Thanks for watching this very long video. Make sure to subscribe and follow me on Instagram.